Relax and listen to the voice.
The Garden of Paradise. There was once a king's son who had a larger and more beautiful collection of books than anyone else in the world, and full of splendid copperplate engravings. He could read and obtain information respecting every people of every land, but not a word could he find to explain the situation of the Garden of Paradise, and this was just what he most wished to know. His grandmother had told him when he was quite a little boy, just old enough to go to school, that each flower in the Garden of Paradise was as sweet as cake, that the pistils were full of rich wine, that on one flower history was written, on another geography or tables. So those who wished to learn their lessons only had to eat some of the cakes, and the more they ate, the more history, geography, or tables they knew. He believed it all then, but as he grew older, he learnt more and more. He became wise enough to understand that the splendor of the Garden of Paradise must be very different to all of this. Oh, why did Eve pluck the fruit from the tree of knowledge? Why did Adam eat the forbidden fruit? Thought the king's son. If I had been there, it would never have happened, and there would have been no sin in the world. The Garden of Paradise occupied all his thoughts till he reached his 17th year. One day he was walking alone in the wood, which was his greatest pleasure, when evening came on. The clouds gathered, and the rain poured down as if the sky had been a waterspout, and it was as dark as the bottom of a well at midnight. Sometimes he slipped over the smooth grass, or fell over stones that projected out of the rocky ground. Everything was dripping with moisture, and the poor prince had not a dry thread about him. He was obliged at last to climb over great blocks of stone, with water spurting from the thick moss. He began to feel quite faint, and when he heard a most singular rushing noise, and saw before him a large cave from which came a blaze of light. In the middle of the cave an immense fire was burning, and a noble stag, with its branching horns, was placed on a spit between the trunks of 2 pine trees. It was turning slowly before the fire, and an elderly woman, as large and as strong as if she had been a man in disguise, sat by, throwing one piece of wood after another into the flames. "Come in," she said to the prince. "Sit down by the fire and dry yourself." "There is a great draught here," said the prince, as he seated himself on the ground. "It will be worse when my sons come home," replied the woman. "You are now in the cavern of winds, and my sons are the 4 winds of heaven. Can you understand that?" "Where are your sons?" asked the prince. "It is difficult to answer stupid questions," said the woman. "My sons have plenty of business on hand. They are playing at shuttlecock with the clouds up yonder in the king's hall," and she pointed upwards. "Oh, indeed," said the prince. "But you speak more roughly and harshly, and are not so gentle as the woman that I am used to." "Yes, that is because they have nothing else to do. But I am obliged to be harsh, to keep my boys in order, and I can do it, although they are headstrong. Do you see those 4 sacks hanging from the wall? Well, they are just as much afraid of those sacks as you used to be of the rat behind the looking-glass. I can bend the boys together and put them in the sacks without any resistance on their parts, I can tell you. There they stay, and dare not attempt to come out until I follow them to do so. And here comes one of them." It was the north wind who came in, bringing with him a cold, piercing blast. Large hailstones rattled on the floor, and snowflakes were scattered around in all directions. He wore a bearskin dress and cloak. His sealskin cap was drawn over his ears. Long icicles hung from his beard, and one hailstone after another rolled from the collar of his jacket. "Don't go too near the fire," said the prince, "or your hands and face will be frostbitten." "Frostbitten?" said the North Wind with a loud laugh. "Why, frost is my greatest delight. What sort of little snip are you, and how did you find your way to the cavern of the winds?" "He is my guest," said the old woman, "and if you are not satisfied with that explanation, you can go into the sack. Do you understand me?" That settled the matter. So the North Wind began to relate his adventures, whence he came, and where he had been for a whole month. "I come from the polar seas," he said. "I have been on Bear's Island with the Russian walrus hunters. I sat and slept at the helm of their ship as they sailed away from North Cape. Sometimes when I woke, the storm birds would fly about my legs. They are curious birds. They give one flap with their wings, and then on their outstretched pinions soar far away." "Don't make such a long story of it," said the Mother of the Winds. "What sort of place is Bear's Island?" "A very beautiful place, with a floor for dancing as smooth and flat as a plate. Half-melted snow, partly covered with moss, sharp stones, and skeletons of walruses and polar bears lie all about, their gigantic limbs in a state of green decay. It would seem as if the sun never shone there. I blew gently to clear away the mist, and then I saw a little hut which had been built from the wood of a wreck, and was covered with the skins of the walrus, the fleshy side outwards. It looked green and red, and on the roof sat a growling bear. Then I went to the seashore to look after the birds' nests, and saw the unfledged nestlings opening their mouths and screaming for food. I blew into the 1,000 little throats, and quickly stopped their screaming. Farther on were the walruses with pigs' heads and teeth a yard long, rolling about like great worms." "You relate your adventures very well, my son," said the mother. "It makes my mouth water to hear you." "After that," continued the North Wind, "the hunting commenced. The harpoon was flung into the breast of the walrus, so that a smoking stream of blood spurted forth like a fountain and besprinkled the ice. And then I thought of my own game. I began to blow and set my own ships, the great icebergs, sailing so that they might crush the boats. Oh, how the sailors howled and cried out, but I howled louder than they. They were obliged to unload their cargo and throw their chests and the dead walruses on the ice. And then I sprinkled snow over them, and left them in their crushed boats to drift southward and to taste salt water. They will never return to Bear's Island." "So you have done mischief," said the Mother of the Winds. "I shall leave others to tell the good that I have done," he replied. "But here comes my brother from the west. I like him best of all, for as he has the smell of sea about him, and brings in a cold, fresh air as he enters." "Is that little Zephyr?" asked the prince. "Yes, it is the little Zephyr," said the old woman. "But he is not little now. In years gone by he was a beautiful boy. Now that is all past." He came in looking like a wild man, and he wore a slouched hat to protect his head from injury. In his hand he carried a club, cut from a mahogany tree in the American forests, not a trifle to carry. "Oh, whence do you come?" asked the mother. I come from the wilds of the forests, where they thorny brambles form thick hedges between the trees, where the water snake lies in the wet grass, and mankind seems to be unknown." "What were you doing there?" "I looked deep into the river and saw it rushing down from the rocks. The water drops mounted to the clouds and glittered in the rainbow. I saw the buffalo, the wild buffalo, swimming in the river, but the strong tide carried him away amidst a flock of wild ducks, which flew into the air as the waters dashed onwards, leaving the buffalo to be hurled over the waterfall. This pleased me, so I raised a storm, which rooted up old trees and sent them floating down the river." "And what else have you done?" asked the old woman. "I have rushed wildly across the savannas. I have stroked the wild horses and shaken the cocoa nuts from the trees. Yes, I have many stories to relate, but I need not tell everything I know. You know it all very well, don't you, old lady?" And he kissed his mother so roughly that she nearly fell backwards. Oh, he was indeed a wild fellow. Now in came the south wind, with a turban and a flowing Bedouin cloak. "How cold it is here," said he, throwing more wood on the fire. "It is easy to feel that the north wind has arrived here before me." "Why, it is hot enough here to roast a bear," said the north wind. "You are a bear yourself," said the other. "Do you want to be put in the sack, both of you?" said the old woman. "Sit down now on that stone yonder, and tell me where you have been." "In Africa, mother. I went out with the Hottentots, who were lion hunting in the Kaffir land, where the plains are covered with grass, the color of green olive. And here I ran races with the ostrich, but I soon outstripped him in swiftness. At last I came to the desert, in which lie the golden sands, looking like the bottom of the sea. Here I met a caravan, and the travelers had just killed their last camel to obtain water. There was very little for them, and they continued their painful journey beneath the burning sun and over the hot sands, which stretched before them a vast, boundless desert. Then I rolled myself in the loose sand and whirled it in burning columns over their heads. The dromedaries stood still in terror, while the merchants drew their caftans over their heads and threw themselves on the ground before me, as they do before Allah, their God. Then I buried them beneath a pyramid of sand, which covers them all. When I blow that away on my next visit, the sun will bleach their bones, and travelers will see that others have been there before them. Otherwise, in such a wild desert, they may not believe it possible." "So you have done nothing but evil," said the mother. "Into the sack with you." And before he was aware, she had seized the south wind round the body and popped him into the bag. He rolled about on the floor until she sat herself upon him to keep him still. "These boys of yours are very lively," said the prince. "Yes," she replied, "but I know how to correct them when necessary. Oh, and here comes the fourth." Then in came the east wind, dressed like a Chinese. "Oh, you come from that quarter, do you?" said she. "I thought that you had been to the Garden of Paradise." "I am going there tomorrow," he replied. "I have not been there for 100 years. I have just come from China, where I danced round the porcelain tower till all the bells jingled again. In the streets, an official flogging was taking place, and bamboo canes were being broken on the shoulders of men of every high position, from the 1st to the 9th grade. They cried, "Many thanks, my fatherly benefactor," but I am sure the words did not come from their hearts, so I rang the bells till they sounded, "Ding-dong, ding-dong." "You are a wild boy," said the woman. "It is well for you that you are going tomorrow to the Garden of Paradise. You always get improved in your education there. Drink deeply from the fountain of wisdom while you are there, and bring home a bottleful for me." "That I will," said the East Wind. "But why have you put my brother South in a bag? Let him out, for I want him to tell me about the phoenix bird. The princess always wants to hear of this bird when I pay her my visit every 100 years. If you will open the sack, sweetest mother, I will give you 2 pocketfuls of tea, green and fresh as when I gathered it from the spot where it grew." "Well, for the sake of the tea, and because you are my own boy, I will open the bag." She did so, and the south wind crept out, looking quite cast down, because the prince had seen his disgrace. "There is a palm leaf for the princess," he said. "The old phoenix, the only one in the world, gave it to me himself. He has scratched on it with his beak the whole of history during the 100 years he has lived. She can there read how the old phoenix set fire to his own nest and sat upon it while it was burning. Like a Hindu widow, the dry twigs around the nest crackled and smoked till the flames burst forth and consumed the phoenix to ashes. Amidst the fire lay an egg, red hot, which presently burst with a loud report, and out flew a young bird. He is the only phoenix in the world, and the king over all other birds. He has bitten a hole in the leaf which I give you, and that is his greeting to the princess." "Now, let us have something to eat," said the mother of the winds. So they all sat down to feast on the roasted stag, and as the prince sat by the side of the east wind, they soon became good friends. "Pray tell me," said the prince, "who is that princess of whom you have been talking, and where lies the Garden of Paradise?" "Ho, ho!" said the east wind. "Would you like to go there? Well, you can fly off with me tomorrow, but I must tell you one thing. No human being has been there since the time of Adam and Eve. I suppose you have read of them in your Bible." "Of course I have," said the prince. "Well," continued the east wind, "when they were driven out of the Garden of Paradise, it sunk into the earth, but it retained its warm sunshine, its balmy air, and all its splendor. The fairy queen lives there, in the island of happiness, where death never comes, and all is beautiful. I can manage to take you there tomorrow, if you will sit on my back, but now, don't talk any more, for I want to go to sleep." And then they all slept. When the prince awoke in the early morning, he was not a little surprised at finding himself high up above the clouds. He was seated on the back of the east wind, who held him faithfully, and they were so high in the air that woods and fields, rivers and lakes, as they lay beneath them, looked like a painted map. "Good morning," said the east wind. "You might have slept on a while, for there is very little to see in the flat country over which we are passing, unless you like to count the churches. They look like spots of chalk on a green board." The green board was the name that he had given to the green fields and meadows. "It was very rude of me not to say good-bye to your mother and your brothers," said the prince. "They will excuse you, as you were asleep," said the east wind, and then they flew on faster than ever. The leaves and branches of the trees rustled as they passed. When they flew over seas and lakes, the waves rose higher, and the large ships dipped in the water like diving swans. As darkness came on, towards evening, the great towns looked charming. Lights were sparkling, now seen, now hidden, just as the sparks go out, one after another, on a piece of burnt paper. The prince clapped his hands with pleasure, but the east wind advised him not to express his admiration in that manner, or he might fall down and find himself hanging on a church steeple. The eagle in the dark forest flies swiftly, but faster than he flew the east wind. The Cossack, on a small horse, rides lightly over the plains, but lighter still past the prince on the winds of the wind. "There are the Himalayas, the highest mountains in Asia," said the east wind. "We shall soon reach the Garden of Paradise now." Then they turned southward, and the air became fragrant with the perfume of spices and flowers. Here, figs and pomegranates grew wild, and the vines were covered with clusters of blue and purple grapes. Here they both descended to the earth and stretched themselves on the soft grass, while the flowers bowed to the breath of the wind as if to welcome it. "Are we now in the Garden of Paradise?" asked the prince. "No, indeed," replied the east wind. "But we shall be there very soon. Do you see that wall of rocks on that cavern beneath it, over which the grapevines hang like a green curtain? Through that cavern we must pass. Wrap your cloak round you, for while the sun scorches you here, a few steps farther it will be icy cold. The bird flying past the entrance to the cavern feels as if one wing were in the region of summer and the other in the depths of winter." "So this, then, is the way to the Garden of Paradise?" asked the prince as they entered the cavern. It was indeed cold, but the cold soon passed, for the east wind spread his wings, and they gleamed like the brightest fire. As they passed on through this wonderful cave, the prince could see great blocks of stone from which water trickled, hanging over their heads in fantastic shapes. Sometimes it was so narrow that they had to creep on their hands and knees, while at other times it was lofty and wide, like the free air. It had the appearance of a chapel for the dead, with petrified organs and silent pipes. "We seem to be passing through the Valley of Death on the way to the Garden of Paradise," said the prince. But the east wind answered not a word, only pointed forwards to a lovely blue light which gleamed in the distance. The blocks of stone assumed a misty appearance, till at last they looked like white clouds in moonlight. The air was fresh and balmy, like a breeze from the mountains perfumed with flowers from the Valley of Roses. A river, as clear as the air itself, sparkled at their feet, while in its clear depths could be seen gold and silver fish sporting in the bright water, and purple eels emitting sparks of fire at every moment, while the broad leaves of the water lilies that floated on its surface flickered with all the colors of the rainbow. The flower, in its color of flame, seemed to receive its nourishment from the water, as a lamp is sustained by oil. A marble bridge of such exquisite workmanship that it appeared as if formed of lace and pearls led to the island of happiness, in which bloomed the Garden of Paradise. The east wind took the prince into his arms and carried him over, while the flowers and the leaves sang the sweet songs of his childhood in tones so full and soft that no human voice could venture to imitate. Within the garden grew large trees full of sap, but whether they were palm trees or gigantic water plants, the prince knew not. The climbing plants hung in garlands of green and gold, like the illuminations on the margins of old missals or twined among the initial letters. Birds, flowers, and festoons appeared intermingled in seeming confusion. Close by, on the grass, stood a group of peacocks with radiant tails outspread to the sun. The prince touched them and found, to his surprise, that they were not really birds, but the leaves of a burdock tree, which shone with the colors of a peacock's tail. The lion and the tiger, gentle and tame, were springing about like playful cats among the green bushes, whose perfume was like the fragrant blossom of the olive. The plumage of the wood pigeon glistened like pearls as it struck the lion's mane with its wings, while the antelope, usually so shy, stood near, nodding its head as if it wished to join in the frolic. The Fairy of Paradise next made her appearance. Her raiment shone like that of the sun, and her serene countenance beamed with happiness like that of a mother rejoicing over her child. She was young and beautiful, and a train of lovely maidens followed her, each wearing a bright star in her hair. The east wind gave her the palm leaf, on which was written the history of the phoenix, and her eyes sparkled with joy. She then took the prince by the hand and led him into her palace, the walls of which were richly colored, like a tulip leaf when it is turned to the sun. The roof had the appearance of an inverted flower, and the colors grew deeper and brighter to the gazer. The prince walked to a window and saw what appeared to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil, with Adam and Eve standing by, and the serpent quite near them. "I thought that they were banished from paradise," he said. The princess smiled and told him that time had engraved each event on a window pane in the form of a picture, but, unlike other pictures, all that it represented lived and moved. The leaves rustled, and the persons went and came, as in a looking-glass. He looked through another pane, and saw the ladder in Jacob's dream, on which the angels were ascending and descending with outspread wings. All that had ever happened in the world here lived and moved on the panes of glass, in pictures such as time alone could produce. The fairy now led the prince into a large, lofty room with transparent walls through which the light shone. Here were portraits, each one appearing more beautiful than the other. Millions of happy beings whose laughter and song mingled in one sweet melody. Some of these were in such an elevated position that they appeared smaller than the smallest rosebud, or like pencil dots on paper. In the center of the hall stood a tree with drooping branches from which hung golden apples, both great and small, looking like oranges among the green leaves. It was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, from which Adam and Eve had plucked and eaten the forbidden fruit, and from each leaf trickled a bright red dewdrop, as if the tree were weeping tears of blood for their sin.
"Let us now take the boat,"
said the fairy.
"A sail on the cool waters will refresh us, but we shall not move from the spot. Although the boat may rock on the swelling water, the countries of the world will glide before us, but we shall remain still."
It was indeed wonderful to behold. First came the lofty Alps, snow-clad and covered with clouds and dark pines. The horn resounded, and the shepherds sang merrily in the valleys. The banana trees bent their drooping branches over the boat. Black swans floated on the water, and singular animals and flowers appeared on the distant shore. New Holland, the fifth division of the world, now glided by, with mountains in the background looking blue in the distance. They heard the song of the priests, and saw the wild dance of the savage to the sound of the drums and trumpets of bone, the pyramids of Egypt rising to the clouds, columns and sphinxes, overthrown and buried in the sand, followed in their turn, while the northern lights flashed out over the extinguished volcanoes of the north, in fireworks that none could imitate. The prince was delighted, and yet he saw hundreds of other wonderful things, more than can be described. "Can I stay here forever?" asked he.
"That depends on yourself,"
replied the fairy.
"If you do not, like Adam, long for what is forbidden, you can remain here always."
"I should not touch the fruit on the tree of knowledge," said the prince. "There is an abundance of fruit equally beautiful."
"Examine your own heart,"
said the princess.
"and if you do not feel sure of its strength, return with the east wind who brought you. He is about to fly back, and will not return here for 100 years. The time will not seem to you more than 100 hours, yet even that is a long time for temptation and resistance. Every evening when I leave you, I shall be obliged to say, 'Come with me,' and to beckon to you with my hand. But you must not listen, nor move from your place to follow me, for with every step you will find your power to resist weaker. If once you attempted to follow me, you would soon find yourself in the hall, where grows the tree of knowledge, for I sleep beneath its perfumed branches. If you stooped over me, I should be forced to smile. If you then kissed my lips, the garden of paradise would sink into the earth, and to you it would be lost. A keen wind from the desert would howl around you, cold rain would fall on your head, and sorrow and woe would be your future lot."
"I will remain," said the prince. So the east wind kissed him on the forehead and said, "Be firm, and then we shall meet again when 100 years have passed. Farewell, farewell!" And then the east wind spread his broad pinions, which shone like a lightning in harvest, or as the northern lights in a cold winter. "Farewell, farewell!" echoed the trees and flowers. Storks and pelicans flew after him in feathery bands to accompany him to the boundaries of the garden.
"Now we will commence dancing,"
said the fairy.
"and when it is nearly over at sunset, while I am dancing with you, I shall make a sign and ask you to follow me, but do not obey. I shall be obliged to repeat the same thing for 100 years, and each time, when the trial is past, if you resist, you will gain strength, till resistance becomes easy, and at last the temptation will be quite overcome. This evening, as it will be the first time, I have warned you."
After this, the fairy led him into a large hall, filled with transparent lilies. The yellow stamina of each flower formed a tiny golden harp, from which came forth strains of music like the mingled tones of flute and lyre. Beautiful maidens, slender and graceful in form, and robed in transparent gauze, floated through the dance, and sang of the happy life in the garden of paradise, where death never entered, and where all would bloom forever in immortal youth. As the sun went down, the whole heavens became crimson and gold, and tinted the lilies with the hue of roses. Then the beautiful maidens offered to the prince sparkling wine, and when he had drank, he felt happiness greater than he had ever known before. Presently, the background of the hall opened, and the tree of knowledge appeared, surrounded by a halo of glory that almost blinded him. Voices as soft and lovely as his mother's sounded in his ears, as if she were singing to him.
"My child, my beloved child."
Then the fairy beckoned to him and said in sweet accents,
"Come with me."
Forgetting his promise, forgetting it even on the very first evening, he rushed towards her, while she continued to beckon to him and to smile. The fragrance around him overpowered his senses. The music from the harp sounded more entrancing, while around the tree appeared millions of smiling faces, nodding and singing. "Man should know everything. Man is the Lord of the earth." The tree of knowledge no longer wept tears of blood, for the dewdrops shone like glittering stars.
"Come, come,"
continued the thrilling voice, and the prince followed the call. At every step his cheeks glowed, and the blood rushed wildly through his veins. "I must follow," he cried. "It is not a sin, it cannot be, to follow beauty and joy. I only want to see her sleep, and nothing will happen unless I kiss her, and that I will not do, for I have strength to resist, and a determined will." The fairy threw off her dazzling attire, bent back the boughs, and in another moment was hidden among them. "I have not sinned yet," said the prince, "and I will not." And then he pushed aside the boughs to follow the princess. She was lying already asleep, beautiful as only a fairy in the Garden of Paradise could be. She smiled as he bent over her, and he saw tears trembling out of her beautiful eyelashes. "Do you weep for me?" he whispered. "Oh, weep not, thou loveliest of women! Now do I begin to understand the happiness of paradise. I feel it to my inmost soul in every thought. A new life is born within me. One moment of such happiness is worth an eternity of darkness and woe." He stooped, and he kissed the tears from her eyes, and touched her lips with his. A clap of thunder, loud and awful, resounded through the trembling air. All around him fell into ruin. The lovely fairy, the beautiful garden, sunk deeper and deeper. The prince saw it sinking down in the dark night until it shone only like a star in the distance beneath him. Then he felt a coldness, like death, creeping over him. His eyes closed, and he became insensible. When he recovered, a chilling rain was beating upon him, and a sharp wind blew on his head. "Oh, alas, what have I done?" he sighed. "I have sinned like Adam, and the Garden of Paradise has sunk into the earth." He opened his eyes and saw the star in the distance, but it was the morning star in heaven, which glittered in the darkness. Presently he stood up and found himself in the depths of the forest, close to the cavern of the winds, and the mother of the winds sat by his side. She looked angry and raised her arm in the air as she spoke. "The very first evening," she said. "Well, I expected it. If you were my son, you should go into the sack." "And there he will have to go at last," said a strong old man with large black wings and a scythe in his hand, whose name was Death. "He shall be laid in his coffin, but not yet. I will allow him to wander about the world for a while, to atone for his sin, and to give him time to become better. But I shall return when he least expects me. I shall lay him in a black coffin, place it on my head, and fly away with it beyond the stars. There also blooms a garden of paradise, and if he is good and pious, he will be admitted. But if his thoughts are bad, and his heart full of sin, he will sink with his coffin deeper than the garden of paradise has sunk. Once in every 1,000 years, I shall go and fetch him, but he will either be condemned to sink still deeper, or be raised to a happier life in the world beyond the stars." The Flying Trunk. There was once a merchant who was so rich that he could have paved the whole street with gold, and would even then have had enough for a small alley. But he did not do so. He knew the value of money better than to use it in this way. So clever was he that every shilling he put out brought him a crown, and so he continued till he died. His son inherited his wealth, and he lived a very merry life with it. He went to a masquerade every night, made kites out of 5-pound notes, and threw pieces of gold into the sea instead of stones, making ducks and drakes of them. In this manner, he soon lost all of his money. At last, he had nothing left but a pair of slippers, an old dressing gown, and 4 shillings. And now all his friends deserted him. They could not walk with him in the streets, but one of them, who was very good-natured, sent him an old trunk with this message: "Pack up." "Yes," he said, "it is all very well to say pack up." But he had nothing left to pack. Therefore, he seated himself in the trunk. It was a very wonderful trunk. No sooner did anyone press on the lock than the trunk could fly. He shut the lid and pressed the lock, when away flew the trunk, up the chimney with the merchant's son in it, right up into the clouds. Whenever the bottom of the trunk cracked, he was in a great fright, for if the trunk fell to pieces, he would have made a tremendous somerset over the trees. However, he got safely in his trunk to the land of Turkey. He hid the trunk in the wood under some dry leaves, and then went into the town. He could so do this very well, for the Turks always go about dressed in dressing gowns and slippers, as he was himself. He happened to meet a nurse with a little child. "I say, you Turkish nurse," cried he, "what castle is that near the town, with the windows placed so high?"
"The king's daughter lives there," she replied. "It has been prophesied that she will be very unhappy about a lover, and therefore no one is allowed to visit her unless the king and queen are present."
"Well, thank you," said the merchant's son. So he went back to the wood, seated himself in his trunk, flew up to the roof of the castle, and crept through the window into the princess's room. She lay on the sofa asleep, and she was so beautiful that the merchant's son could not help kissing her. It was then she awoke, and was very much frightened, but he told her that he was a Turkish angel who had come down through the air to see her, which pleased her very much. He sat down by her side and talked to her. He said her eyes were like beautiful dark lakes in which the thoughts swam about like little mermaids, and he told her that her forehead was a snowy mountain which contained splendid halls full of pictures. And then he related to her about the stork who brings the beautiful children from the rivers. These were delightful stories, and when he asked the princess if she would marry him, she consented immediately.
"But you must come on Saturday," she said, "for the king and queen will take tea with me. They will be very proud when they find that I am going to marry a Turkish angel. But you must think of some very pretty stories to tell them, for my parents like to hear stories better than anything. My mother prefers one that is deep and moral, but my father likes something funny to make him laugh."
"Very well," he replied. "I shall bring you no other marriage portion than a story." And so they parted. But the princess gave him a sword which was studded with gold coins, and these he could use. Then he flew away to the town and bought a new dressing gown, and afterwards returned to the wood, where he composed a story, so as to be ready for Saturday, which was no easy matter. It was ready, however, by Saturday, when he went to see the princess. The king and queen and the whole court were at tea with the princess, and he was received with great politeness.
"Will you tell us a story?" said the queen. "One that is intrusive and full of deep learning."
"Yes, but something in it to laugh at," said the king. "Well, certainly," he replied, and commenced at once, asking them to listen attentively. "There once was a bundle of matches that were exceedingly proud of their high descent. Their genealogical tree, that is, a large pine from which they had been cut, was at one time a large old tree in the wood. The matches now lay between a tinder box and an old iron saucepan, and were talking about their youthful days. "Ah, when we grew on the green boughs, and we were as green as they. Every morning and every evening we were fed with diamond drops of dew. Whenever the sun shone, we felt his warm rays, and the little birds would relate stories to us as they sung. We knew that we were rich, for the other trees only wore their green dress during the summer. But our family were able to array themselves in green, summer and winter. But the woodcutter came, like a great revolution, and our family fell under the axe. The head of the house obtained a situation as mainmast in a very fine ship, and can sail around the world when he will. The other branches of the family were taken to different places, and our office now is to kindle a light for common people. This is how such high-born people as we came to be in the kitchen." "Mine has been a very different fate," said the iron pot, which stood by the matches. "From my first entrance into the world, I have been used to cooking and scouring. I am the first in this house when anything solid or useful is required. My only pleasure is to be made clean and shining after dinner, and to sit in my place and have a little sensible conversation with my neighbors. All of us, excepting the water bucket, which is sometimes taken into the courtyard, live here together within these four walls. We get our news from the market basket, but he sometimes tells us very unpleasant things about the people and the government. Yes, and one day an old pot was so alarmed that he fell down and was broken to pieces. He was a liberal, I can tell you that." "You're talking too much," said the tinder box, and the steel struck against the flint till some sparks flew out, crying, "We want a merry evening, don't we?" "Yes, of course," said the matches. "Let us talk about those who are the highest born."
"No, I don't like to always be talking of what we are," remarked the saucepan. "Let us think of some other amusement. I will begin. We will tell something that has happened to ourselves that will be very easy and interesting as well, on the Baltic Sea, near the Danish shore."
"What a pretty commencement," said the plates. "We shall all like that story, I am sure."
"Yes, well, in my youth I lived in a quiet family where the furniture was polished, the floors scoured, and clean curtains put up every fortnight."
What an interesting way you have of relating a story, said the carpet broom. It's easy to perceive that you have been a great deal in women's society. There's something so pure that runs through what you say.
"That is quite true," said the water bucket, and he made a spring with joy, and splashed some water on the floor. Then the saucepan went on with his story, and the end was as good as the beginning. The plates rattled with pleasure, and the carpet broom brought some green parsley out of the dust hole and crowned the saucepan, for he knew it would vex the others, and he thought,
If I crown him today, he will crown me tomorrow.
"Now let us have a dance," said the fire tongs, and then how they danced and struck up one leg in the air. The chair cushion in the corner burst with laughter when she saw it. "Shall I be crowned now?" asked the fire tongs. So the broom found another wreath for the tongs.
They were only common people after all,
thought the matches. The tea urn was now asked to sing, but she said that she had a cold and could not sing without boiling heat. They all thought that this was affectation, and because she did not wish to sing excepting in the parlor, went on the grand table with the grand people. In the window sat an old quill pen, with which the maid generally wrote. There was nothing remarkable about the pen, excepting that it had been dipped too deeply in the ink, but it was proud of that.
"If the tea turn won't sing,"
said the pen, She can leave it alone. There's a nightingale in a cage who can sing. She has not been taught much, certainly, but we need not say anything this evening about that." "I think it highly improper," said the tea kettle, who was kitchen singer and half-brother to the tea urn, "that a rich foreign bird should be listened to here. Is it patriotic? Let the market basket decide what is right."
"I certainly am vexed," said the basket. "Inwardly vexed more than anyone can imagine. Are we spending the evening properly? Would it not be more sensible to put the house in order? If each were in his own place, I would lead a game. This would be quite another thing." "Let us act a play," said they all. At the same moment the door opened, and the maid came in. Then not one stirred. They all remained quite still, yet at the same time there was not a single pot amongst them who had not a high opinion of himself and what he could do if he chose. "Yes, if we had chosen," they each thought, "we might have spent a very pleasant evening." The maid took the matches and lighted them. Dear me, how they sputtered and blazed up. "Now then," they thought, "everyone will see that we are the first. How we shine! What a light we give!" Even while they spoke, their light went out.
"What a capital story," said the Queen. "I feel as if I were really in the kitchen and could see the matches. Yes, you shall marry our daughter."
"Certainly," said the king. "Thou shalt have our daughter." The king said "thou" to him, because he was going to be one of the family. The wedding day was fixed, and on the evening before, the whole city was illuminated. Cakes and sweetmeats were thrown among the people. The street boys stood on tiptoe and shouted, "Hurrah!" and whistled between their fingers. Altogether, it was a very splendid affair. "I will give them another treat," said the merchant's son. So he went and bought rockets and crackers and all sorts of fireworks that could be thought of, packed them in his trunk, and flew up with it into the air. What a whizzing and popping they made as they went off! The Turks, when they saw such a sight in the air, jumped so high that their slippers flew about their ears. It was easy to believe after this that the princess was really going to marry a Turkish angel. As soon as the merchant's son had come down in his flying trunk to the wood after the fireworks, he thought, "I will go back into the town now and hear what they think of the entertainment." It was very natural that he should wish to know, and what strange things people did say, to be sure. Everyone whom he questioned had a different tale to tell, though they all thought it very beautiful. "I saw the Turkish angel myself," said one. "He had eyes like glittering stars and a head like foaming water."
"He flew in a mantle of fire,"
cried another.
"and lovely little cherubs peeped out from the folds."
He heard many more fine things about himself, and that the next day he was to be married. After this, he went back to the forest to rest himself in his trunk. It had disappeared. A spark from the fireworks which remained had set it on fire, and it was burnt to ashes. So the merchant's son could not fly any more, nor go to meet his bride. She stood all day on the roof waiting for him, and most likely she is waiting there still, while he wanders through the world telling fairy tales, but none of them so amusing as the one he related about the matches. The Storks. On the last house in a little village, the storks had built a nest, and the mother stork sat in it with her 4 young ones, who stretched out their necks and pointed their black beaks, which had not yet turned red like those of the parent birds. A little way off, on the edge of the roof, stood the father stork, quite upright and stiff, not liking to be quite idle. He drew up one leg and stood on the other, so still that it seemed almost as if he were carved in wood.
"It must look very grand," thought he, "for my wife to have a sentry guarding her nest. They do not know that I am her husband. They will think I have been commanded to stand here, which is quite aristocratic." And so he continued to stand on one leg. In the streets below were a number of children at play, and when they caught sight of the storks, one of the boldest amongst the boys began to sing a song about them, and very soon he was joined by the rest. These are the words of the song, but each only sang what he could remember of them in his own way. "Stork, stork, fly away. Stand not on one leg, I pray. See, your wife is in her nest, with her little ones at rest. They will hang one and fry another. They will shoot a third and roast his brother."
"Just hear what those boys are singing,"
said the young storks.
"They say that we shall be hanged and roasted."
"Never mind what they say. You need not listen," said the mother. "They can do no harm." But the boys went on singing and pointing at the storks and mocking at them, excepting one of the boys whose name was Peter. He said it was a shame to make fun of animals and would not join with them at all. The mother stork comforted her young ones and told them not to mind. "See," she said, "how quiet your father stands, although he is only on one leg."
"But we are very much frightened,"
said the young storks, and they drew back their heads into the nests. The next day, when the children were playing together and saw the storks, they sang the song again. "They will hang one and roast another."
"Shall we be hanged and roasted?"
asked the young storks.
"No, certainly not," said the mother. "I will teach you how to fly, and when you have learnt, we will fly into the meadows and pay a visit to the frogs, who will bow themselves to us in the water and cry, 'Croak, croak, croak,' and then we shall eat them up. That will be fun."
"And what next?"
asked the young storks.
"Then," replied the mother, "all the storks in the country will assemble together and go through their autumn maneuvers, so that it is very important for everyone to know how to fly properly. If they do not, the general will thrust them through with his beak and kill them. Therefore you must take pains and learn, so as to be ready when the drilling begins."
"Then we may be killed after all, just as the boys say. And hark, there they are, singing again."
"Listen to me and not to them," said the mother stork. "After the great review is over, we shall fly away to warm countries far from hence, where there are mountains and forests, to Egypt, where we shall see 3-cornered houses built of stone, with pointed tops that reach nearly to the clouds. They are called pyramids, and are older than a stork could imagine. And in that country there is a river that overflows its banks, and then goes back, leaving nothing but mire. There we can walk about and eat frogs in abundance."
"Oh, oh!"
cried the young storks.
"Yes, it is a delightful place. There is nothing to do all day long but eat, and while we are so well off out there, in this country there will be not a single green leaf on the trees, and the weather will be so cold that the clouds will freeze and fall on the earth in little white rags."
The stork meant snow, but she could not explain it in any other way.
Will the naughty boys freeze and fall in pieces?
asked the young storks.
No, they will not freeze and fall into pieces,
said the mother.
but they will be very cold and be obliged to sit all day in a dark, gloomy room, while we shall be flying about in foreign lands where there are blooming flowers and warm sunshine.
Time passed on, and the young storks grew so large that they could stand upright in the nest and look about them. The father brought them every day beautiful frogs, little snakes, and all kinds of stork dainties that he could find. And then, how funny it was to see the tricks he would perform to amuse them. He would lay his head quite round over his tail and clatter with his beak as if it had been a rattle, and then he would tell them stories all about the marshes and fens.
"Come," said the mother one day, "now you must learn to fly."
And all the 4 young ones were obliged to come out onto the top of the roof. Oh, how they tottered at first, and were obliged to balance themselves with their wings, or they would have fallen to the ground below.
"Look at me," said the mother. "You must hold your heads in this way, and place your feet so. Once, twice, that is it. Now you will be able to take care of yourselves in the world."
Then she flew a little distance from them, and the young ones made a spring to follow her, but down they fell, plump, for their bodies were still too heavy.
"I don't want to fly,"
said one of the young storks, creeping back into the nest.
"I don't care about going to warm countries." "Would you like to stay here and freeze when the winter comes?" said the mother. "Or till the boys come to hang you or to roast you? Well then, I'll call them." "Oh, no,"
said the young stork, jumping out on the roof with the others. And now they were all attentive, and by the 3rd day could fly a little bit. Then they began to fancy that they could soar, so they tried to do so, resting on their wings, but they soon found themselves falling and had to flap their wings as quickly as possible. The boys came again in the street singing their song, "Stork, stork, fly away."
"Shall we fly down and pick their eyes out?"
asked the young storks.
"No, leave them alone," said the mother. "Listen to me, that is much more important. Now then, 1, 2, 3. Now to the right. 1, 2, 3. Now to the left, round the chimney. There now, that was very good. That last flap of the wings was so easy and graceful that I shall give you permission to fly with me tomorrow to the marshes. There will be a number of very superior storks there with their families, and I expect you to show them that my children are the best brought up of any who may be present. You must strut about proudly. It will look well and make you respected." "But may we not punish those naughty boys?" asked the young storks. "No! Let them scream away as much as they like. You can fly from them now, high up amid the clouds, and will be in the land of the pyramids when they are freezing, and have not a green leaf on the trees, or an apple to eat." "We will revenge ourselves," whispered the young storks to each other as they again joined the exercising.
Of all the boys in the street who sang the mocking song about the storks, not one was so determined to go on with it as he who first began it. Yet he was a little fellow, not more than 6 years old. To the young storks he appeared at least 100, for he was so much bigger than their father and mother. To be sure, storks cannot be expected to know how old children and grown-up people are. So they determined to have their revenge on this boy, because he began the song first, and would keep on with it. The young storks were very angry, and grew worse as they grew older, so at last Their mother was obliged to promise that they should be revenged, but not until the day of their departure.
"We must see first how you acquit yourselves at the grand review,"
said she.
"If you get on badly there, the general will thrust his beak through you, and you will be killed, as the boy said, though not exactly in the same manner. So we must wait and see."
"You shall see," said the young birds. And then they took such pains and practiced so well every day that at last it was quite a pleasure to see them fly so lightly and prettily. As soon as the autumn arrived, all the storks began to assemble together before taking their departure for warm countries during the winter. Then the review commenced. They flew over forests and villages to show what they could do, for they had a long journey before them. The young storks performed their part so well that they received a mark of honor, with frogs and snakes as a present. These presents were the best part of the affair, for they could eat the frogs and snakes, which they very quickly did.
"Now, let us have our revenge,"
they cried.
"Yes, certainly,"
cried the mother stork.
"I have thought upon the best way to be revenged. I know the pond in which all the little children lie, waiting till the storks come to take them to their parents. The prettiest little babies lie there dreaming more sweetly than they will ever dream in the time to come. All parents are glad to have a little child, and children are so pleased with a little brother or sister. Now we will fly to the pond and fetch a baby for each of the children who did not sing that naughty song to make game of the storks."
"But the naughty boy who began the song first, what shall we do to him?"
cried the young storks.
"There lies in the pond a little dead baby who has dreamed itself to death,"
said the mother.
"We will take it to the naughty boy, and he will cry because we have brought him a little dead brother. But you have not forgotten the good boy who said it was a shame to laugh at animals. We will take him a little brother and sister too, because he was good. He is called Peter, and you shall all be called Peter in future."
So they all did what their mother had arranged, and from that day, even till now, all the storks have been called Peter. The Angel. Whenever a good child dies, an angel of God comes down from heaven, takes the dead child in his arms, spreads out his great white wings, and flies with him over all the places which the child had loved during his life. Then he gathers a large handful of flowers, which he carries up to the Almighty, that they may bloom more brightly in heaven than they do on earth. And the Almighty presses the flowers to his heart, but he kisses the flower that pleases him best, and it receives a voice, and is able to join the song of the chorus of bliss. These words were spoken by an angel of God as he carried a dead child up to heaven, and the child listened as if in a dream. Then they passed over well-known spots where the little one had often played, and through beautiful gardens full of lovely flowers.
"Which of these shall we take with us to heaven to be transplanted there?"
asked the angel. Close by grew a slender, beautiful rosebush, but some wicked hand had broken the stem, and the half-open rosebuds hung faded and withered on the trailing branches.
"Poor rosebush,"
said the child.
"let us take it with us to heaven, that it may bloom above in God's garden."
The angel took up the rosebush, then he kissed the child, and the little one half opened his eyes. The angel gathered also some beautiful flowers, as well as a few humble buttercups and heartsease.
"Now we have flowers enough,"
said the child, but the angel only nodded. He did not fly upward to heaven. It was night, and quite still in the great town. Here they remained, and the angel hovered over a small narrow street, in which lay a large heap of straw, ashes, and sweepings from the houses of people who had removed. There lay fragments of plates, pieces of plaster, rugs, rags, old hats, and other rubbish not pleasant to see. Amidst all this confusion, the angel pointed to the pieces of a broken flower pot and to a lump of earth which had fallen out of it. The earth had been kept from falling to pieces by the roots of a withered field flower which had been thrown amongst the rubbish.
"We will take this with us," said the angel. "I will tell you why as we fly along."
And as they flew, the angel related the history.
"Down in that narrow lane, in a low cellar, lived a poor sick boy. He had been afflicted from his childhood, and even in his best days he could just manage to walk up and down the room on crutches once or twice, but no more. During some days in summer, the sunbeams would lie on the floor of the cellar for about half an hour. In this spot, the poor sick boy would sit, warming himself in the sunshine and watching the red blood through his delicate fingers as he held them before his face. Then he would say he had been out, yet he knew nothing of the green forest and its spring verdure, till a neighbor's son brought him a green bough from a beech tree. This he would place over his head and fancy that he was in the beech wood while the sun shone and the birds caroled gaily. One spring day, the neighbor's boy brought him some field flowers, and among them was one to which the roots still adhered. This he carefully planted in a flower pot and placed in a window seat near his bed. And the flower had been planted by a fortunate hand, for it grew, put forth fresh shoots, and blossomed every year. It became a splendid flower garden to the sick boy, and his little treasure upon earth. He watered it and cherished it, and took care it should have the benefit of every sunbeam that found its way into the cellar, from the earliest morning ray to the evening sunset. The flower entwined itself even into his dreams. For him it bloomed, for him spread its perfume. And it gladdened his eyes, and to the flower he turned, even in death, when the Lord called him. He has been 1 year with God. During that time, the flower has stood in the window, withered and forgotten, till at length, cast out now among the sweepings into the street, on the day of the lodger's removal. And this poor flower, withered and faded as it is, we have added to our nosegay, because it gave more real joy than the most beautiful flower in the garden of a queen."
"But how can you know all of this?"
asked the child whom the angel was carrying to heaven.
"I know it," said the angel, "because I myself was the poor sick boy who walked upon crutches, and I know my own flower well."
Then the child opened his eyes and looked into the glorious, happy face of the angel, and at the same moment they found themselves in that heavenly home where all is happiness and joy. And God pressed the dead child to his heart, and wings were given him so that he could fly with the angel, hand in hand. Then the Almighty pressed all the flowers to his heart, but he kissed the withered field flower, and it received a voice. Then it joined in the song of the angels who surrounded the throne, some near and others in a distant circle, but all equally happy. They all joined in the chorus of praise, both great and small, the good, happy child, and the poor field flower, that once lay withered and cast away on a heap of rubbish in a narrow, dark street. Thank you all for being here and listening. Here's a real quick ending for you. Take care of yourselves, take really, really good care of yourselves, take care of those people around you, and remember, always try to have sweet dreams.